Abandoned under the relentless sun, a lone figure stumbled through the cracked earth, her shadow stretched thin against the unforgiving horizon. The wind whispered rumors of a nameless widow, a ghost without a past, moving like a whisper through the wasteland. In the distance, the silhouette of a feared man awaited, the dark pistol at his side as much a warning as a promise. Her fate now dangled in the balance: seek refuge in the lair of the hunted, or perish in the dust. The land bore scars deeper than any flesh, endless canyons, jagged cliffs, and the dry cradle of forgotten dreams. Scorching winds bore the scent of sagebrush and gunpowder, while sun-bleached bones peeked through the soil. This was a place untouched by mercy, where solitude was the closest companion, and shadows moved not just with the setting sun, but with the restless spirits that haunted the vast frontier. She was a woman stripped of everything, her name erased by grief, her history buried beneath the weight of a cruel world that turned its back on those who fell. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now held only the dull glint of survival, a heart caged by fear, yet hungry for a spark of redemption. Meanwhile, the man who beckoned from his isolated domain carried the weight of a notorious past. Whispers of gunfights, betrayal, and vengeance clung to him like the dust of these lands, both marked by scars invisible to the eye. They faced the same wilderness, not just of the earth, but of trust and survival. When she reached the threshold of his weathered homestead, the price of sanctuary was unspoken but clear. His acceptance was a shadowed promise, shelter in exchange for silent loyalty, acceptance laced with suspicion. Around them, danger pulsed like a heartbeat, lawmen closing in, outlaws hungry for blood, and the unforgiving canyon itself plotting their undoing. To stay meant facing the ghosts of their pasts entwined. To leave meant embracing oblivion. Their first meeting was a fragile dance of guarded glances and terse words. Trust was a currency neither could afford. Her voice, timid yet steady, told of losses without names. His silence was a fortress, built from years of betrayal. Amidst the tension, a flicker of something fragile, hope or caution, began to emerge in their shared solitude. They were strangers, forged by desperation, bound by the unseen chains of fate. But just as the desert's chill settled into their bones, a sudden echo shattered the uneasy calm. A distant shot, sharp and unforgiving, fractured the horizon. Barely a heartbeat later, the pounding of hooves rose on the dusty trail, carrying with it a peril more immediate than either had dared expect. The sanctity of their precarious refuge hung by a thread, and the question burned between them: would survival demand trust, or only lead to ruin? Many fellow wanderers who follow our legends across these forgotten lands have told us that fate, or the treacherous YouTube algorithm, sometimes quietly undoes their subscriptions. Before the next perilous trail unfolds, and a new twist reveals itself, take a quick look below the video and make sure you're still riding with our band to not lose the thread of the tale. We don't want you to miss any voices echoing from this canyon. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The sharp crack of the distant shot still echoed in the dry air, reverberating through the jagged canyons like a restless spirit unleashed. The widow's breath caught in her throat as the pounding of hooves shattered the fragile silence, awakening every muscle to tense readiness. The man at her sighed, silent, his dark eyes narrowed beneath the heavy brows, moved with a deliberate calm that belied the storm stirring beyond his homestead. She pressed her back against the rough timber of the weathered porch, heart hammering a desperate rhythm. The wind whispered warnings through the brittle sagebrush, carrying scent of dust and fear. Between them lay the thin margin between sanctuary and damnation, fragile as a spider's web in the relentless sun. Each shadow cast spelled threat. Every distant sound promised ruin. His voice, barely more than a rasp, sliced through the tension. Lawmen, or worse, they don't forgive. Not here, not ever. She swallowed the dry lump rising in her throat. The wilderness around them was merciless. No second chances, no hiding behind innocent lies. Yet she clung to this sliver of refuge like a prayer whispered in the dark. Night began to crawl over the desert, painting the cracked earth with blood-red hues. The widow's gaze slipped to the horizon, where moonlight shimmered against unforgiving stone. Somewhere beyond the canyon's edge, pursuers closed in, their intent as cold and sharp as the single bullet that shattered the silence. The choice loomed: flee into uncertain oblivion, or stand and fight beside this man marked by shadows. He studied her with a hard edge, softened by unspoken understanding. You'll need a weapon if they find us first. A rusty rifle rested within reach inside the cabin, a relic of past battles and broken promises. She hesitated, fingers trembling as she reached out, the weight of survival settling heavy in her palms. The gun was cold, unforgiving, yet it was the only tether to life in this forsaken expanse. Their eyes met, a flicker of fragile trust bridging the gulf carved by years of isolation and suspicion. He nodded once, grave and deliberate, as if passing on the burden of an unspoken pact. You don't fire unless I say. Night deepened, and with it came the crawl of shadows, horrors conjured by their own fears. Around the homestead, every creak and whistle held menace, every rustle of dry leaves a herald of unseen watchers. The widow's breath sharpened, her pulse pounding in time with the rattling wind. Suddenly, a low bark shattered the stillness, a fierce, urgent sound from the darkness. From the shadows emerged a lean, muscled dog, its fur dusted with the desert's ochre, eyes blazing with a wild intelligence. The man's face softened imperceptibly. "Old ghost," he muttered. The dog's arrival was no accident, a sentinel summoned in a land where trust came at a deadly price. The dog padded forward, then stopped at the widow's feet, sniffing cautiously, before settling with a reluctant calm. The presence of this creature, a living bridge between the savage and the tame, cast a strange warmth over the night's chill. Here, in this scarred wilderness, trust breathed in small acts, a dog's loyalty, a glance without threat. Beside the firelight flickering inside the cabin, they sat in tense companionship. The man, whose name was known only to few and spoken in hushed legends, began recounting the scars beneath his silence. Years carved like etchings on weathered stone. A brother lost to a betrayal too sharp to forget. Dreams burned in the fires sparked by vengeance. His voice was rough, layered with regret and iron will. She listened, the ghosts in her own past surfacing with each word. The widow's losses, the nameless faces swallowed by unrelenting time, found echo in this man, forged by pain. Their shared solitude became a fragile thread, weaving a tapestry of wounded lives, each seeking redemption in a landscape that offered none freely. Suddenly, the howl of wind rose, carrying whispers too sharp to ignore. A shiver passed between them. Tension frayed the edges of their fragile alliance. "They'll come soon," he warned quietly. "Better to prepare for what's coming than wait for mercy that never arrives." The widow's gaze hardened, shadows of resolve flickering in depths once dulled by despair. "If they want me, they'll have to get through you first." His lips twitched in what might have been the faintest ghost of a smile or a warning. "And then me." The hours before dawn slipped as they moved like shadows themselves, quiet, watchful, tethered to survival's thin thread. Outside, the desert breathed with cold menace. Inside, the cabin held a fragile heartbeat of hope, defiant, against the storm, gathering beyond the rimrock. Then, a sudden crack, a snap of a twig, too close, too deliberate. The dog rose on stiff legs, teeth bared in a low growl that echoed the widening chasm of fear closing in on them. From the dark beyond, a glint caught the firelight, the barrel of a rifle, aimed with deadly intent. Time shrank to a stillness no breath could break. The man's hand went steady to his pistol. Years of blood etched in the calm of movement, but the widow's voice held him, sharp, trembling yet commanding. "Wait." The intruder's eyes gleamed through the gloom, unsure, searching. Then came the low, steady words, broken, hesitant, yet unmistakably human, spoken with a tremor that split the night. "Wait." A stifled cry cut through the tension, freezing the moment. A child stepped into the firelight, skin painted with the ochres and reds of the Apache, eyes bright with fear yet unyielding. His small fingers clutched something close to his chest, a wounded hawk, its feathers matted with dust and blood. Both adults froze, the fragile web of conflict stretched taut between survival, suspicion, and the fragile flicker of empathy neither dared to speak aloud. The man's pistol wavered. The widow's heart thundered in the brittle silence. And from the shadows, a faint, unmistakable breath of words came. A whisper, carried not by enemies or allies, but by a boy who carried the weight of a complicated war on his slight shoulders. "Help, please." The boy's plea echoed through the cracked silence, piercing the wary stillness that had settled between them. The man's hand hesitated, fingers lingering on the worn grip of his pistol, the weight of years pressing down with unspoken command. The widow's gaze locked onto the child's face, painted with the ochre marks of his people, eyes wide with a fierce blend of fear and desperate hope. Outside, the desert wind whispered warnings again, tugging at the edges of their fragile sanctuary. The man shifted, voice low and cautious. You brought trouble with you, boy. Speak your truth fast." The child's chest heaved, breath ragged and uneven beneath a shaken frame. "Mista, they're close. They followed me through the canyons. They want to take the hawk. Say it's a sign." The widow's heart clenched at the tenderness with which the boy cradled the wounded bird, its faint breaths a fragile thread holding life against the desert's merciless grasp. She stepped forward, voice soft but firm. "We can't turn him away now. Not when this land don't forgive the weak." The man's eyes flashed, half defiance, half burdened understanding. "This ain't no place for children, especially Apaches. You know what comes when lawmen get a scent of one." The child looked to both of them, unflinching, despite the terror tangled deep in his young eyes. "Please, the hawk, it's the last of its mate. If it dies, the river won't flow right. The earth'll grow colder. My people need it." A silence thick as desert dust fell between them. The widow's breath caught at the faint tremor that ran through the man's jaw. A ghost of old loyalties, buried grudges fighting back to life. The wind stirred the brittle leaves, carrying with it the ghosts of battles long past. He finally sheathed the pistol, lips pressed tight into a thin line. "You stay here, quiet as the night. If they come for you, I swear I'll be the last thing they see." The boy's gaze flickered toward the cabin's dim glow. "Thank you." Hours slipped by like shadows, stretching thin across cracked stone. Inside, the fire sputtered low, its weak light casting long shapes on the wooden walls. The widow sat near the boy, hands steady despite the cold clamp of fear gripping her chest. The man worked in silence, checking old rifles and loading weathered cartridges, a ritual carved into his days by necessity and sorrow. The fragile truce lingered, woven not with words, but with shared survival. Trust was a scarce currency here, traded in whispers and wary glances. They were fragments of broken lives, bound by a desert that showed no mercy, and by foes closing with each passing hour. Suddenly, the dog, Old Ghost, growled, ears pricked to the night's chill. The man froze, eyes narrowing into black slits. Tense muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. From then, dark figures moved, shapes outlined against the moon's pale kiss, silhouettes draped in the grim garb of lawmen, their faces etched with resolve and judgment. The first lantern cast a sickly glow over the dust. A hunt was at hand. The widow's breath hitched. The boy pressed closer, clutching the hawk protectively. The man met her eyes, silent command passing between them. This night would carve new scars, whether etched in blood or mercy. The leader stepped forward, voice cold and unforgiving. "There's a child here, an Apache. Turn him over, and no one needs to get hurt." The man smiled, grim and bitter. "You don't understand these lands, or the debts they hold." Before the lawman could reply, a sudden cry ripped through the night. The hawk wounded anew, struggling fiercely. The boy's quiet sob shattered the tension, stoking a flame of desperation in the widow's chest. It was not just a bird they guarded. It was hope itself, fragile and fierce. Then the dog barked fiercely, lunging from the shadows, teeth bared with savage loyalty. Chaos erupted, hooves pounding, a shot fired into the far canyon wall. The sharp report tearing through the night like thunder, caught between assault and desperate defense. Alliances were tested. The widow moved with sudden resolve, grabbing the rifle her companion handed her, eyes blazing with reluctant courage. The man's pistol sang its cold promise. Old Ghost tore after the advancing shadow. Amid the echo of gunfire, the boy held the hawk close, whispering words lost to the wind, but heavy with meaning. The land screamed beneath their feet, the scars of old battles mingling with the fresh wounds of this night. And then, silence. In the stillness left behind, the dust and gunpowder, rose a single haunting sound, a soft, deliberate whistle, carried by the desert breeze, weaving through the canyons like a ghost's lament. Neither friend nor foe could tell its source, yet in that moment, eyes narrowed beneath heavy brows. The man knew. The war they thought they'd left behind had come riding on the wind once more. Behind the line of lawmen and whispered prayers, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, tall, silent, moving with a deadly grace. It was neither stranger nor simple enemy. It was a legend reborn, and the widow's fragile hope trembled on the edge of a blade, sharper than any bullet. The sharp report of the gunshots still echoed in the canyon's depths, a burning imprint on the night air. The pounding hooves grew louder, relentless and unforgiving. Every nerve in the widow's body screamed for flight, yet her back pressed against the rough timber of the porch, tethered by a fragile thread of alliance to the man at her side. His dark eyes cut through the shadows, unblinking, calculating. "They come fast," he muttered, voice low and cracked like dry earth. "But so do we." A sudden growl split the silence. Old Ghost, his lean desert dog, stepped from the darkness, fixed on the encroaching shapes with a fierce intelligence that spoke of countless battles fought beside his master. The air thickened with tension, every breath a gamble between hope and doom. The widow's fingers trembled as she steadied the rifle, its cold metal biting into her palms. She cast a quick glance at the boy curled close beside the fire, clutching the wounded hawk with trembling hands. The child's painted face was pale beneath the ochres, eyes wide and watchful despite his youth. "They won't rest," the man whispered, jaw tight. "Not until they find what they're chasing." Movement flickered beyond the lantern glow. Figures wrapped in the grim cloak of lawmen, faces carved by years of hard judgment. The canyon held its breath. The widow's heart thudded a desperate rhythm, the weight of her losses heavy beneath the desert stars. Yet beneath the fear, a steady flame of fierce resolve kindled. Here, in this merciless wilderness, survival demanded choices carved from fire and grit. As the lawmen's leader stepped forward, voice like a cold blade slicing through the night, the widow met his gaze with a courage born from the ashes of grief. "There's a child here," the voice rang out, "an Apache. Turn him over, and no one else needs to bleed." The man's lips curled into a bitter smile, the shadows of past betrayals tightening his features. "You don't understand these lands or the debts they owe." From the darkness, the boy's soft voice broke the charged silence, trembling yet fierce. The hawk is dying. If it dies, the river will dry. The earth will turn cold. My people need it. The widow felt the fragile thread unraveling within her, the lifeline of hope for something greater than mere survival. She stepped toward the boy, offering steady hands and a gentle voice. We won't let this land swallow him. Not tonight. The lawman's eyes narrowed, suspicion pooling like storm clouds. The man's pistol whispered a deadly promise. But before the violence could erupt, Old Ghost lunged, teeth bared and eyes aflame, a living barrier of loyalty. Chaos shattered the stillness. Gunfire erupted. Sharp as lightning, striking dry stone, the widow's breaths came fast, each shot a poem of desperation. She aimed where the shadowy shapes neared, hands steady, despite the pounding of her heart. The boy clung to the wounded hawk, whispering words carried away by the desert wind, ancient calls that spoke of survival and legacy. The land itself seemed to tremble, scarred by old wounds, yet fierce with new life. Suddenly, the gunfire ceased, the silence that followed heavy with loss and promise. From the edge of the firelight, a soft whistle rose, strange and haunting, weaving through the canyon like a mournful spirit reclaiming its voice. Eyes met across the fire's glow. The man's gaze, darker than the desert night. The widow's, steady with unyielding fire. From the shadows beyond the circle of light, a figure detached itself, moving with a deadly grace that silenced even the restless wind. Not a stranger, not an enemy, a legend reborn. Silence fell broken only by the faint rustle of a hawk's fragile breath. And in that suspended moment, the widow's fragile hope trembled on the sharp edge of fate. The moment the boy stepped into the firelight, everything shifted. The night held its breath, the tension tight enough to snap. The man's pistol wavered, fingers brushing the worn grip as memories of betrayals whispered through his mind. The widow's heart pounded, caught between fear and a rising flame of unexpected protectiveness. The wounded hawk's faint breath stirred in the boy's hands, fragile as hope itself. His small voice trembled, but carried a fierce conviction. Please, the hawk won't live much longer. If it dies, the river will change, and with it, the land my people depend on. For a long moment, the canyon swallowed their silence. Outside, the wind stirred the brittle sagebrush. Even Old Ghost lay alert, his amber eyes reflecting the flames. The man's gaze darkened, shadowed by grudges born of a land that spared no mercy. Yet beneath the weariness, something unresolved flickered, a stubborn spark refusing to die. There's danger coming, the man growled, voice as dry as the desert dust. Lawmen, they don't care for sick birds or children. He shifted, every muscle coiled like the spring waiting to snap. If you want this place, you'll have to earn it. The widow stepped forward, her voice soft but steady as sand slipping through fingers. No one gets left behind, not out here. She met the boy's gaze, finding in his fear a mirror of her own, loss, and that desperate hunger for something to hold on to. The boy nodded, clutching the hawk tighter as its wings trembled against his chest. They followed me through the canyons. They say this bird is a sign something worth hunting. A raw wind swept past, carrying with it the ghosts of battles etched into the earth, echoes of blood and broken promises. The man glanced toward the far rim rock, eyes narrowing beneath heavy brows. They'll be here before dawn. His words cut through the night like a sharpened blade, a warning woven with the weight of countless past skirmishes. Inside the dim cabin, the fire sputtered low, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The widow moved with slow purpose, gathering ragged cloth to bandage the hawk's battered wing. Each careful touch was a silent prayer against the inevitable storm. Outside, Old Ghost growled low, a sentinel patrolling the edge of fragile safety. The pounding hooves drew closer, thundering like the heartbeat of the approaching tempest. The boys whispered prayers blended with the crackling flames, words ancient and mournful. The man loaded his pistols with practiced efficiency, every click a grim punctuation marking the passage of time. His eyes found the widow's, bearing the weight of unspoken understanding. This night would demand more than courage. It would test the fragile bonds born of necessity. Suddenly, a sharp crack, a twig snapping under heavy boot. The shadows around the cabin shifted as figures emerged, grim shapes cloaked in worn leather and cold menace. Lanterns bobbed, casting sickly light over grim faces and determined eyes. The leader stepped forward, voice cold and unforgiving, slicing the fragile silence. "There's an Apache child here. Hand him over, and none of you need to get hurt." The man's lips twisted in a bitter, humorless smile. "This land's got debts you don't understand. Ain't no one handing over what they'd die to protect." The widow's breath caught as the boy pressed the hawk close, a fragile shield against the harsh night. "If this bird dies," he whispered, "the world will grow colder. My people need it to live." Chaos ignited like dry tinder. Old Ghost sprang, teeth bared, a wild fury unleashed. Gunfire cracked, sharp, sudden, like thunder ripping through fragile skies. The widow's rifle rang steady, each shot a heartbeat of defiance. Amid the clash, the boy knelt, murmuring prayers that drifted on the wind like fading embers. The hawk stirred weakly, a feathered symbol of fragile hope in a land scarred by harsh truths. When silence claimed the night once more, a cold breath of wind carried a haunting whistle, a mournful note weaving through the canyons, undefinable and chilling. The gathered eyes in the firelight turned toward the shadowed tree line. From the darkness stepped a figure, moving with a deadly grace that seemed to bend the very air. Not a stranger, but a living legend, an echo of the frontier's forgotten past, reborn and drifting between worlds. The man's gaze hardened, the widow's hands clenched, and the boy tightened his hold on the hawk. The night held its breath, the fragile hope suspended on a blade sharper than any bullet. Then from the silent darkness, a voice below a breath spoke with deadly calm. "You've carried the wound of this land far enough. It's time to pay the price." The sharp crack of the twig snapping beneath boot soon gave way to the deeper, grinding scrape of iron harnesses, a sound rolling toward them over the brittle night air. The shadows had drawn close, folding the homestead into a tightening noose. Inside, the tension was a tangible thing. The man's hand hovered by his pistol, muscles coiled against the weight of years filled with betrayals and lost causes. His breath was steady, but measured like a held storm, sparing none a hint of the tempest beneath. The widow's fingers curled tightly around the rifle, knuckles pale, heart pounding a drumbeat, loud enough to drown the silence. The boy clung tighter to the hawk, its shallow breaths, a fragile tether amid the relentless threat. Outside, the lawmen advanced, their torches flickering like specters along the rimrock, faces sharp as the edges of the canyon walls. Their leader's voice cut sharp, slicing through the night's heaviness. "Come out! No tricks! We want the child and the bird." The man's voice came like dry gravel, trembling only with years of hardened grit. "You don't come here for a child or a bird. You come for reckoning you can't pay." The words lingered, a solemn warning, underlined by the low growl from Old Ghost. The dog's posture was rigid, eyes like burning coals, fixed on the encroaching shapes. The animal sensed it too, the storm's eye moving closer with merciless intent. The boy's whisper trembled in the thick night. "If they take the hawk, the river will dry. The earth, it will forget its promise." The widow's gaze searched the boy's face, seeing the desperate weight no child should carry, a burden kindled by ancient laws and wounded earth. She shifted, voice steady but quietly fierce. "Then we fight, because this land doesn't kneel to cowardice." A sudden flare ignited the dark, the lawmen firing a warning shot, the crack echoing like a gunpowder heartbeat, throbbing through the canyon. The man cursed under his breath, stepping into the firelight with pistol drawn, eyes sharp and cold. "Stay close," he said, voice low but unwavering. "This night decides more than lives. It carves the future we all will bear." The widow's rifle rose, steady. The boy pressed the hawk closer, his whispered prayers a fragile song against the rage of the night. The first volley shattered silence, bullets tearing through the brittle air. Old Ghost lunged forward, fury unleashed, teeth bared, a living shield between the fragile sanctuary and the wrath beyond. Chaos exploded, shouts, gunfire, noises of struggle mixed with the harsh cries of desert wind. The man moved with lethal precision, each shot a testament to battles fought in shadows long past. The widow's aim held fast, a careful dance between desperation and determination. The boy crouched near the cabin's edge, murmuring under breath, caressing the hawk's trembling wings. The bird flinched, weak yet fiercely alive, a delicate symbol of fragile hope, cradled within a world scorched by harsh injustice. Essence of survival ignited in thin bursts, mingling with the harsh scent of gunpowder and sage. Tension biting like shattered glass beneath stars cruel and unyielding. The fire's orange glow flickered, as if battling the shadows themselves, casting their fractured shapes into harsh relief against walls scarred by wind and time. Suddenly, silence swept the canyon like a bitter winter's breath. The firefight stilled, ears straining, the air thick with unspoken reckoning. From the faint flicker of firelight, a whistle rose, soft, deliberate, weaving a thread of sound through the vast canyon walls. It carried no mercy, no allegiance, only the cold weight of an impending reckoning. The man's eyes narrowed to slits, shadows folding deep beneath his brow. The widow's breath caught as the boy clutched his precious charge. Their fragile alliance turned razor's edge by the night's cruel demands. From the darkness beyond the lantern's reach, a figure emerged, tall, moving with a stealth that rippled like a whispered curse. The shape spoke of legend and myth, a presence straddling the thin line between the living and the shadows of the forgotten. No words came immediately, only the heavy pulse of eyes locked on the silent intruder. The tension stretched, fragile as a spider's thread, ready to snap with the slightest breath. Then, a voice, low and as cold as the desert stone, pierced the silence. "You carry wounded ghosts, but the land thirsts for justice. Tonight, debts will be paid." The sharp report of a rifle echoed once more, then faded into the vast stillness of the canyon. Hooves thundered like distant thunder, breaking the fragile calm that had settled around the weathered homestead. The widow's breath hitched, muscles tensed as the canyon swallowed sound and shadows alike. The man's eyes sharpened, dark and distant, narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "Lawman, or worse," he murmured, voice rough as dry earth. "They come fast in packs." She pressed against the rough-hewn wood of the porch, heart pounding a tempo that matched the pounding of hooves. The firelight flickered behind them, casting long, shifting shadows across the cracked floorboards. Between moments, the night seemed to hold its breath, the wilderness itself waiting for the inevitable storm. A low growl broke the silence. The lean form of Old Ghost, the man's desert dog, stepped forward from the darkness, muscles taut and eyes blazing with feral intelligence. His presence was a living barrier, a sentinel in this land where trust was earned with blood and tested by fire. The widow clutched the cold metal of the rifle with trembling fingers. The weight suddenly more than iron and wood. It was a lifeline. Her gaze caught the fragile figure curled near the fire, the boy clutching the wounded hawk with desperate tenderness. The child's painted face, streaked with ochres, reflected shadows of fear, masked by stubborn courage. "They hunt the boy," she whispered, voice barely audible. "But it's the hawk they really want." The man's jaw tightened, a flicker of old pain flashing across his face and quickly buried. "That bird, it's more than a symbol. It belongs between worlds." His hand brushed the worn grip of his pistol, the scars of past battles etched into every careful movement. Outside, the first lantern bobbed in the night, a ghostly light moving closer. The lawmen's leader stepped into the firelight, face hard set and eyes colder than the desert stone. "An Apache child is here. Hand him over, and this ends without blood." The man's response was bitter, carved from years of betrayals. "You don't know what you're asking. For this land's debts run deep, and we're all chained to them." The widow's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes met the boy's. The weight he carried was ancient, heavier than any gun or threat. "If the hawk dies," the child whispered, "the river will dry. The earth will forget its promise." A sudden silence filled the space between them, taut and fragile as a spider's web in a storm. The fire flickered, shadows leaping like restless souls. Then a sharp bark shattered the stillness. Old Ghost lunged forward, teeth bared and eyes aflame, a fury unleashed. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks bursting like lightning through the dry air. The widow's rifle rose steady in her hands, the cold steel singing. Death to the shadows inching forward. The man moved with brutal grace, each shot a carefully measured history of hardship. Amid the chaos, the boy knelt by the fire's edge, whispered prayers slipping from trembling lips. A silent lullaby to the hawk's faint heartbeat. It flinched, but fought on, a fragile thread woven through a tapestry of blood and dust. The night roared around their small fortress of fire and grit. Voices shouted curses, boots stamped fury into dirt, and somewhere the wail of the wounded echoed like a haunting melody. The widow's eyes burned bright, bones aching as the impossible weight of survival closed in. Then, as suddenly as it began, the gunfire ceased, the canyon holding its breath once more. Tension rippled in the air, thick and unyielding. From the dark edges came a soft, deliberate whistle, a mournful note threading through the canyon walls like a ghost's lament. All eyes turned. The man's gaze sharpened, old grudges surfacing beneath his heavy lids. The widow's pulse quickened, the boy clutching the hawk tighter. Their fragile alliance poised on the sharp edge between life and destruction. From the shadows stepped a figure, tall, silent, moving with a grace that seemed woven from the very fabric of the desert night. Not a stranger, not simply an enemy, a living ghost, a legend reborn. The wind carried a voice, cold and clear as the edge of a knife. "You carry the wound of this land far enough. Tonight, its debts must be paid." The cabin's flickering light caught the glint of steel, a promise of reckoning hanging heavy in the air. As the man's hand twitched near his pistol, and the widow's breath caught beneath a sky full of ancient stars, the boy's fierce eyes locked on the figure emerging from the darkness. A restless storm gathering between the ragged lines of law and vengeance. A war resurrected on the wind. The hawk trembled in his hands, its breath faint but unyielding. The night pressed in with a heart of the whispered plea, lingered in the dense desert night, a fragile thread unraveling the silence between them. The boy's gaze, fierce beneath the ochre-streaked skin, held the weight of lands parched and promises broken, a silent testament to hope hanging by a breath. The man's pistol hand twitched on the worn grip, tension coiled beneath years of scars and hardened solitude. The widow's breath caught, a soft intake that spoke of tethered courage and the fragile pulse of trust. "Stay in the shadows," the man commanded, voice rough and low, "and don't move unless I say." The boy nodded, clutching the hawk closer, the fragile bird's shallow breath a whisper against his chest. Outside, The desert seemed to hold its breath, the dry wind murmuring through brittle sagebrush like a restless spirit stirring. The quiet menace of approaching lawmen pressed the night into a tightening noose. Their lanterns bobbed like grim warnings along the rimrock, faces carved into masks of merciless resolve. Inside the cabin, flickering firelight cast trembling shapes on the weathered walls. The widow knelt beside the boy, her hands steady as she cradled the wounded creature, murmuring words that felt like prayers. The hawk's wings quivered against her palms, brittle as a promise left unkept. Each breath it drew was a fragile claim against the merciless desert. The man moved with deliberate care, loading pistols with silent efficiency. His eyes flicked toward the cabin's rough window, scanning the dark horizon where the shadows grew teeth. Beneath the hard exterior, old ghosts stirred, the weight of past betrayals, lost brothers, and vengeance etched deep like the cracks in the earth outside. Yet beneath that hardness flickered a thread of something unexpected, a silent vow to protect what little hope remained. The dog stirred, old ghost's muscles taut with growing tension. A low growl rumbled through the chilled night air, reverberating against stone, as if the earth itself warned of the coming storm. The man's voice was a rasp through the silence. "They'll be here before dawn. Always come harder than before." The widow's glance hardened. "Then we hold our ground. No running this time." Outside, distant voices whispered against the canyon walls, the gravel grind of boots approaching. Lantern light spilled over dry riverbeds, casting flickering ghosts upon the cracked soil. The desert held its breath as steel gleamed, a silent herald of reckoning. A sudden bark tore through the tension, old ghost leaping forward with teeth bared, a blur of muscle and fury flaring against the dark. The man's pistol rose with practiced precision, shadows playing over his weathered face. The widow's hand steadied on the rifle, the cold barrel biting into her resolve. The lawman's leader appeared at the periphery of the firelight, face unreadable beneath his hat's brim. "We know there's a child here," his voice cut like a whip. "An Apache hiding from justice. Hand him over. And this ends with no blood spilled but yours." The man's laugh was a dry, bitter rasp. "This land doesn't deal in justice, only debts that never die." The boy stirred, eyes locked on the circle of wary faces, his grip tightening around the hawk's fragile form. "If the hawk dies," he whispered, voice taut with ancient fear, "the river will dry, the earth will grow cold, my people's way will end." A heavy silence swallowed the canyon, the air thick with tension and unspoken truths. The widow rose slowly, firelight casting flickering courage across her face. "We won't let the land lose one more dream." The lawmen shifted, suspicion tightening their ranks. Before words could swing another way, old ghost lunged, snarling and teeth flashing like lightning ripping the night, a living barrier between the fragile hope inside and the cold intent beyond. A sudden roar shattered the stillness. Gunfire cracked like thunder in the dry canyon, metal singing death and desperation. The widow's rifle spat fire, each shot a measured breath in the dance of survival. The man's pistol sang, cold and sure, a song of vengeance and protection, born of shadows too deep to name. The boy knelt close, whispering prayers to the hawk, his trembling hands a shield against the desolation closing in. The bird shivered, weak, wounded, yet fighting stubbornly against the desert's claim. Amid the chaos of shouted curses, trampled earth, and cracking timbers, the night seemed to bleed urgency and loss. The fire's glow wavered, casting fractured light on faces carved by hardship and determination. Every heartbeat hammered the fragile line between life and oblivion. Suddenly, the gunfire stilled, the sudden silence slicing through the storm like a razor's edge. A soft, eerie whistle floated up, curling through the canyon like a ghost's lament. It was neither menace nor mercy, but a summons woven from the dust and bones of forgotten battles. All eyes darted toward the darkness beyond their flickering sanctuary. The man's gaze sharpened, the widow's breath caught in her chest, and the boy tightened his hold on the hawk, their fragile alliance trembling on the cusp of nightmare. From the shadows stepped a towering figure, moving with a grace that seemed forged from the desert wind itself. Not a stranger, not a simple enemy, a living legend risen from whispered tales and buried blood. The wind carried a voice, cold and clear as desert stone. You've wandered long with wounds unhealed. Now, the land calls you to reckon with its debt. The man's hand twitched near his pistol as the widow's eyes burned with reluctant fire. The boy's breath steadied, the hawk's faint pulse a stubborn flame against the gathering darkness. Night held its breath, and somewhere deep in the canyon's heart, an ancient reckoning began to stir. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged rimrock, casting long, trembling shadows across the brittle earth. The canyon that had held its breath all night finally exhaled, a whisper of wind carrying smoke and the faint scent of sagebrush, mingled now with something more sacred, a fragile hope renewed. Inside the weathered homestead, silence hung soft and unfamiliar. The gunfire had ceased, replaced by the steady rhythm of breathed forgiveness. The man, whose name was spoken only in hushed legends, lowered his pistol, the weight of a century's bitterness easing from his shoulders. His eyes, dark pools carved with scars unseen, found the boy at his side, small, stoic, holding the wounded hawk close, as if their lives were woven from the same fragile thread. The widow stood by the cracked window, the first gold rays reflecting on her weathered face. Her eyes, once shadowed with fear and grief, now held a quiet strength born from sacrifice and defiance. The long night had forged alliances out of desperation, enemies softened by shared truth. This land, the land of relentless sun and unyielding stones, had scooped them into its hardest embrace and gave back something like mercy. Outside, Old Ghost padded softly through the stillness, the lean dog's amber eyes bright as ever. A silent sentinel on sacred ground. The echoes of gunshots were worn thin, fading into the solemn hymn of the canyon's timeless wind. The boy, his small hands steady now, gently traced the feathers of the hawk, whose breath measured a fragile victory. "The river will run pure again," he breathed. His voice carried neither doubt nor despair, but an unspoken promise. The earth was healing, and so were they. The man's gaze drifted beyond the cabin's rough walls, to where the first light kissed the horizon. "We've paid the price of years," he murmured, voice hoarse. "But this wound—" He tapped a calloused hand over his heart. "This wound can still mend, not in blood, but in trust." His words wove a new kind of covenant, not forged in gunmetal or vengeance, but in understanding. The widow stepped beside him, their joined silence speaking volumes. In the depth of their shared solitude, a fragile bond had been born, one steeped in respect and the desperate hope that beneath the desert's unforgiving gaze, even the most scorched souls could find reprieve. The boy looked up, meeting their eyes with the piercing clarity of youth tempered by the wild. "My people's stories say the hawk's flight carries the secrets of the earth," he said softly. "If it lives, so does the promise of this land." No more words were needed. The sunrise spilled golden courage into the room, softening the harsh lines carved by loss and fear. Outside, the canyons stirred awake, a vast cathedral of stone and sky where the past's shadows fell away beneath the new light. The man reached down, his weathered hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "You carry more than a bird tonight, son. You carry the hope of those who came before and those who will come after." The widow's voice was a steady, warm ember. "We all bear our scars, but here, in this broken land, we can choose what to build from them." Outside the cabin, the distant hum of life began to stir. A lone hawk soared high above the canyon walls, its wings catching the morning breeze, a silent herald of change. The boy followed its flight with awe, the sharp brightness of dawn mirrored in his eyes. The haunting whistle from the night before still lingered in memory, a mournful call transformed now into a solemn promise. The war they thought left behind had etched its mark, but here, in the quiet aftermath, a new chapter was being penned, one not of bloodshed or retribution, but of hard-won peace. The man turned slowly to the widow and the boy, the lines of his face softening in the gentle light. "The frontier takes much, but it also gives," he said, "if we're brave enough to accept its scars." The boy tightened his grip on the hawk, the fragile bird's subtle breaths syncing with the pulse of the land. Together, they stepped outside, feet sinking into the warm earth, shadows melting beneath the merciful sun. The widow looked up, letting the warmth chase away the chill of endless nights. "From now on, we are no longer ghosts here," she whispered. "We are the keepers of the stories worth living." As the sun climbed higher, the canyon filled with the songs of life unbroken. The distant call of birds, the rustling of sagebrush, the steady, sure steps of those who dared to hope. The past was a wound, yes, but it was also a foundation. And beneath the unyielding sky, beneath the scars etched in stone and spirit, a new dawn had come. They would carry the land's story forward, no longer in fear, but in courage. For in the heart of the relentless desert, even the smallest flame could blaze a path through the darkest night. And the frontier, ever wild and waiting, whispered back, not with threats, but with the promise of a new beginning.